guys, it's Godbars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the 33rd episode of my series where I grab a vinyl from my collection, talk about why I love it, what influence it had, and what its place is in the grand scheme of hip-hop. I've kind of inadvertently put myself in a corner recently by doing so many iconic, beloved albums, so I made the last few of this group pretty hard hitters, starting with a personal hero of mine, Jay-Z. I actually also have a Jay-Z album in the group of 2090s classics I'm doing coming up, and as you'll see when I get to that group, pretty much every one of the albums I selected to be in that 20 is as iconic and important to hip hop as an album can be, at least in my opinion. I've been slipping on getting the Black Album forever, and there's a few other projects he has that I just haven't gotten around to getting yet, but I have managed to get a couple of his classics on vinyl. I might actually slightly prefer the Blueprint to his classic debut, Reasonable Doubt, though they're both stellar. I just slightly enjoyed the production on the Blueprint a little bit more. And while his debut was understandably more raw, he was a bit more seasoned when this album came around and he'd started to master his trademark pocket. The Blueprint was Jay's sixth album, but it has to be a top three in his whole discography. And when you're dealing with the output of someone on this level, that's definitely saying a lot. He's one of those guys who has so many amazing albums, fans virtually never agree on a ranking, which in my opinion is the sign of a really consistent but diverse career. However you rank Jay's myriad of projects, I don't think any fan would deny that the Blueprint is up there with the best of them. It also came at a very pivotal moment in his career because, like many rappers who've also been in the game for a decade or so, Jay was faced with the daunting task of transitioning over into the new century and cementing himself as someone who wasn't going to fade with the 90s. He achieves this in multiple ways, and like practically any classic album, it took help from other talented people outside of that Bon Iver album he recorded alone in a cabin. There's a pretty stellar list of producers who provide beats, but I can't ignore that one of those was actually Eminem, who infamously isn't exactly looked at as a beloved producer. However, the beat he made for Jay, or at least co-produced with Louis Resto, is easily the best beat M has ever had a hand in, which is the iconic track Renegade he famously features on as well. While I love his verse and respect and admire what it adds to the song, you'll commonly see people act like M just absolutely washed Jay or something, and I totally disagree. Personally, I think Jay had the better verse, but it wasn't a case of anyone trying to wash anyone. Again, I enjoy Eminem's verse, but personally, I feel like it normally gets more credit because it's flashy. It's obviously technically impressive and well written and delivered, but the pocket Jay gets in is something I grow to appreciate more with age. There's a sort of phenomenon where I don't know if it's explained or studied, but I think when someone with a totally different voice and or faster flow comes in with the second verse or last verse, it can be easy to overhype them sometimes because they changed the energy of the song so much. You have to remember a lot of the time the first guy writes and even records his verse, then sends it to the feature who gets the benefit of writing knowing what the other MC is going to say. Again, I'm not insinuating anything should be taken away from M's verse or any verse that provides a big contrast because that's a quality that drew me to so many of my favorite rappers. I'm just saying I know it sounds a bit pretentious, but if you only hear that song a couple times and just think Eminem killed Jay, I really suggest going back and diving a bit deeper into what Jay is saying and how his bars are structured. That took me a bit away from my point, but it was something I felt was worth addressing because you can't really talk about the producers or features who worked on this album without mentioning Eminem. The rest of the producers who helped bring this glitzy, lush album to life are like a dream team of beatmakers, including Kanye West, Just Blaze, Bank, Timbaland, and the Trackmasters. Speaking of M, he's actually the only feature on here, or at least the only one listed, but Jay really thrives under those settings. It's clear he only brings on features when he thinks the performance is going to add to the given track. He isn't just slapping people on tracks that are too short and feel unfinished. The blueprint is so rich and polished, really nothing on here comes off as unfinished. While this album is covered in memorable moments, it would be hard to debate. The most iconic one comes in the form of Takeover, the ether-provoking diss track centered at Nas. While everyone has their own opinion on who won that battle, I feel like it's another thing fake hip-hop fans just talk out of their ass about, where they act like they can only side with Nas if they say how Jay is absolute garbage or vice versa. I can only speak for myself, but to my knowledge, both of these diss tracks are considered legendary regardless of who you think edged out the other in the competition. It really isn't about who won or lost. I feel like that's kind of a childish way of looking at diss tracks, and these guys are both doing insanely well. It's very clear neither of them had their careers ended by this beef. I think most people acknowledge how dope Ether is, but if you don't think Takeover had multiple insanely dope lines, you're just crazy. For example, just a couple of the slick disses Jay sends Nas's way are went from nasty Nas to Esco's trash, had a spark when you started, but now you're just garbage, fell from top 10 to not mention at all, to your bodyguard Uchiwali's verse better than yours. And you scribbled in your notepad, created your life. I showed you your first tech on tour with Large Professor, then I heard your album about your tech on the dresser. So yeah, I sampled your voice, you was using it wrong. You made it a hot line, I made it a hot song. Referring to the flip Jay did for Dead Presidents. And lastly, I have to mention my personal favorite part when it comes to Jay's disses towards Nas on here, where he says, you said you've been in this 10, I've been in it 5. Smarten up, Nas. 4 albums in 10 years, I can divide. That's one every, let's say, 2. 2 of them shits was due, one was meh, the other is Illmatic. That's a one hot album every 10-year average. There's plenty of dope disses in the first verse aimed at Mobb Deep as well, but I feel like the ones I named are a bit more essential to point out. However, I do want to give a quick shout out to you little fuck, I got money stacks bigger than you. By getting his feelings off his chest through Takeover, he was able to focus on the lush, soulful sound he would become more associated with in the 2000s. Obviously, a lot of this is due to guys like Just Blaze, Kanye, and Bank, who were some of the names that basically defined this era of hip-hop with their high-pitched soul and R&B samples. The Blueprint helped usher that in, and I assume Jay's status and reputation helped open the door for these newer producers at the time like Just Blaze or Ye, who after The Blueprint would start finding placements with notable names like Cameron or just Dipset in general, Scarface, Dead Prez, Slum Village, Fabulous, and that's just to name a few. Obviously, these guys had already been putting in work for years and had made plenty of beats for the likes of State Property, but producing multiple songs on a Jay-Z album is virtually a surefire way to get more work, especially at that time. For example, in my Little Brother video, I mentioned how Ninth Wonder was asked to make a beat for the Black album, and while he'd obviously already put a good amount of time and work in, that placement basically transformed him into a notable figure overnight. Obviously, I'm not implying these guys owe Jay anything, or that without him they wouldn't be able to make it, and I don't think you could find a clip of Jay saying that about anyone, even someone like Kanye, where it's unarguably true. I'm just saying it's really admirable how Jay has consistently reached out to and lifted up less known producers for no reason other than they're talented and deserve it. People love to bring up how he owes his success to Dame Dash and others, but for one, nobody makes it by themselves with zero help, and I never hear Jay saying he did, so it's kind of a moot point. The idea he did zero grinding and was some spoiled kid who sat around until one day Dame Dash came up and offered him fame and fortune for his soul, it's just moronic and naive. No matter how you feel about him, you absolutely cannot deny that having production credits on a Hove album in the early 2000s was basically like hip hop's version of appearing on Johnny Carson in the 70s or 80s. It would have been easier and less risky to just stick to time-tested producers everyone is already familiar with, but by being open-minded and giving fresher producers a chance, not only did he end up with an amazing LP, he helped set a career like Kanye's in motion, which in turn inspired so many newer artists that the tree of influence gets hard to track. It's a bit ironic that so many young Kanye fans dismiss Jay as trash or irrelevant, when if you know anything about early Kanye, one of his most defining traits was his reverence for Hove. One of the best songs on Graduation, Big Brother, the closer track, is completely dedicated to Jay. And if you go back, you can actually really hear the Jay influence in how Kanye would write a lot of his early verses. Nevertheless, there's multiple huge hit singles on here, which display once again that Jay knows how to create music that's extremely accessible, yet always has a goal and is littered with quotable lines. He clearly never goes, alright, for this one I'm aiming to make a radio hit, so I'm gonna dumb down the lyrics and not really do any fancy wordplay. He always puts his integrity and commitment as an MC first, and a lot of people seem to forget or take that for granted because he's an insanely wealthy and successful businessman who's married to Beyonce. This, in my opinion, is Jay in peak form, where he already was rich and successful enough to talk his shit, but he was still new enough in the game to still have something to prove. A lot of rappers are not releasing their best work 6 albums in, let alone 17 albums in, but I'll get to that one when we get back to the more modern 2010s albums. With so many iconic singles, I have to give a few honorable mentions before my main three, like Izzo, HOVA, Takeover, You Don't Know, and Never Change. My three favorites would have to be Heart of the City, Renegade, and Songcry, but again, there's really no lackluster moment on this album. Thank you for watching my 33rd video. We only have 2 more 2000 albums to go for the moment, so I'm going to keep trying to pull out the big guns. So be sure to tune in to see which legend I'm going to discuss next, as well as like, subscribe, and let me know what your favorite moments off the blueprint are. Don't forget to have a great day, and I'll see you next time, okay? Alright.